For the older adult interview, I interviewed my grandpa, and his occupation was woodworking. So he decided to teach me a little bit about woodworking, and we actually built a shelf that I can put in my room. So the video will consist of the steps we took to build this. Here's a picture and layout of the shelf that we plan to build. First, we cut out the wood to the sizes that we would need. We then lined them up to make sure that they would fit correctly and that it was the correct length and size for what we needed. This is also when we traced the designs on the wood that we would end up cutting out in a later step. Next, we cut out the first traced design, making sure that we followed the lines correctly and that it ensured the correct shape that we wanted. This is just another picture of us cutting out the traced designs. My grandpa was always sure to show me how to do it before I actually did it, and I always happened to catch pictures of him doing it rather than me actually doing it, just for safety reasons. Next, we went on and we started sanding the parts that we had already cut out. So sanding is extremely important when it comes to woodworking to make sure that everything is smooth and all of the edges are smooth and not rough. So this is just a glimpse of us sanding. We did a lot of sanding throughout the entire length of this project. Next, we did some measurements on where we were going to put some peg holes to hold things up underneath the shelving part. This is just my grandpa doing some measurements and finding exactly where we should put the peg holes. Next, we used this fancy power tool and we cut out the heart. Here's a video of the power tool in action. We then used this tool to finish cutting out the very end part of the heart that we couldn't get with the other tool. Here's the bottom portion of the shelf so far. We then sanded the inside part of the heart that we just previously cut out. We then drilled the holes for the pegs to go into. We only drilled them about as deep as the pegs would need to go in. We did not go all the way through the wood to make sure that the pegs would fit snugly, but that they would not go all the way through. Here we have both pieces laid out flat. The heart is officially cut out and the holes for the pegs are now done. We have lines drawn on it for where we're going to put it together in the next few steps. We then used a fancy tool to give the edges of the pieces of wood a fancy and nice look. Next, we sanded again just to make sure that everything was smooth and there were no rough patches. After we were done sanding, we put all the pieces together. We used a nail gun and just made sure that everything was one solid piece before we went on to the next step. Here is another view of the whole thing before we begin to stain it. We then stained the whole thing, making sure that we covered each part of the shelf equally, making sure that the stain had an equal darkness across the whole thing, and making sure that we didn't miss any little crevices or any parts of it at all. We had to let the stain dry overnight, so then the next morning we went out and made sure that the stain was all dry, made sure that it looked good, and then we put the first coat of varnishing on the shelf. That just kind of gives it a polishy look. Here's a video of me live in action varnishing the shelf. We can't forget about the pegs. We did stain those as well the night before, but then here's me just covering them with a coat of varnish, making sure that those also turned out as well. Here's a picture of my grandpa and I with the final product of the shelf that he taught me how to make. I can't thank him enough for allowing me to do this with him. It was an amazing experience seeing how much work gets put into all these things that he builds, and he's made some really amazing stuff. So it was a great experience to kind of step into his shoes for a few minutes and see what this really takes.